Sego, sego, guego. Today, I want to talk about something that I've sort of noticed, which I think is interesting. In researching Iroquoian armor, I've occasionally had call to look into the armoring traditions of other people in North America. And something that I've noticed is that I'd never heard about any of these people having armor. And yet, pretty much everywhere I look, I've been able to find some evidence. Pretty much everybody in North America used armor. I can pretty conclusively say that. You know, I'm gonna ditch the pretty much. Everybody in North America used armor back in the day. I'll say that with a bit of confidence. So on. So this got me thinking about other people in the world, wondering, is there anybody in the world who didn't use armor? And if so, is there some legitimate reason why some group might not use armor? And so on, so on, so on. So I've been looking into other groups across the world who have a reputation for not using armor. And it's been going slow and not very well because I don't have the background to do any really good research on other groups. Man, do I ever hate filming outside. Really cold keeps malfunctioning my camera, whatever. So, like if this car goes by, I hate filming outside. Okay. So in doing this research, I've been trying to identify, are there any legitimate reasons why a culture might choose to not use armor? I don't believe that there would be any cultures who didn't develop armor, because armor is pretty basic. Someone makes the observation that when I'm wearing pants, I don't get cut up by thorns, right? It's not a leap to extrapolate that to other things. Oh, if I wear enough pairs of pants, then arrows won't be able to get me, so on, so on, so on. Are there any legitimate reasons why a culture might choose to not utilize armor? I've been thinking that through and looking at examples, and I've sort of come to the idea that there's only one viable reason why a culture might choose to not have armor, and that is their warfare is extremely unlethal. And by unlethal, I don't mean just like relatively non-lethal, like let's say the Iroquoian system. A war might end with only a couple of people dying. That's too lethal, right? That's too lethal, and these people are wearing armor already. So you need something where they're shooting with like 15, 20-pound bows, and they don't use arrowheads, stuff like that, where even without armor, the war is so non-lethal that they don't really need it. That's the only viable situation I can think of. I also don't know if such a situation ever existed. So people put forward like other ideas like, oh, armor is not viable in the heat. Well, I don't buy that. People function in the heat. You just get used to it. People talk about places like, where are the Zulu from? They're from South Africa or something like that. Oh, it's too hot in South Africa for the Zulu to have worn armor. It's not that much hotter in South Africa than like a hot Canadian summer. Besides which, people in much hotter areas wore armor. We take Mexico. Mexico is much hotter than South Africa, and yet people wore cotton armor. So on, so on, so on. Another idea people put forward is, well, if you're not wearing armor, your troops can move faster. Right? The Zulu again. They can, the line from Zulu, what was the movie called? Zulu. How far can you march in a day? Oh, maybe 20 miles? Yeah, well, the Zulu can run. I don't buy that. Let's say that the Zulu come up against somebody who's wearing armor. Well, it just means that they're going to get there faster, but they're going to be all tired out because they've been running all day. And now they have to face somebody who's got armor. I keep checking my camera because it could go off at any moment in the cold. The cold doesn't like cold, whatever. I think the idea of certain cultures not wearing armor comes from two places. People look at the Zulu and think that they're this untouched ecosystem, operating as they always had operated. This is the 1800s. People don't think about the Zulu. People imagine the Zulu fighting. They imagine them out there with like, spears and cowhide shields. Zulu fighting the Brits, they had more muskets than the Brits did. They had something like 50,000 muskets. People don't think about that, partially because of the colonial history. The Brits wanted to sort of stereotype their enemies. Bloody squirrels. Can't you see I'm filming? Get the heck out of here. Partially this is the Brits sort of rewriting history because they want to stereotype their enemy. We're going to come back to that topic. The other part of it is that muskets had been in this region in bits and pieces for 200-300 years, something like that. I forget when the Portuguese went around the Horn. I think the Dutch had been in South Africa since the mid-1600s. Oh, I'm being Eurocentric. There's also the Arabs going up and down the east side of Africa. So the Zulu would have, even if they didn't necessarily have guns for all of that, they would have interacted with guns at this point for several hundred years in bits and pieces. And as I've talked about the introduction of guns destroying any tradition of armor in North America, something very similar could have happened, but we just didn't see it because nobody was writing the history at that point. Something that I suspect is that in a lot of places where you look and you don't find armor, it's because that tradition was disrupted before the history was written. Camera's going to give up on me at any moment now, so I better sort of get on with my point. In looking into this, I've identified a trend in sort of conquest narratives. Let's talk about the Romans, for instance. It's sort of common knowledge that the Gauls fought the Romans naked. Right? You get the image of the Gauls all slathered up in woad war paint or whatever, and they rush headlong, screaming into the Roman formation, heedless of any casualties, unconcerned with damage to their own bodies and whatever. So I'm reading that and I think, where have I heard that before? So I'm doing some reading on like the Roman talk about the Gauls, Romans fighting the Gauls, and I notice a lot of common lines between that and the way people talk about Indians. And I think this sort of ties into something which I'm going to sort of term the Barbarian Warrior myth, which is a cliche that people use to paint their opponents as both fearsome but barbarous. Like sort of the fascist thing, where your opponent is at once superior and a tremendous threat, but also completely inferior and easy to overcome. Those Gauls, they're out there, great big muscular guys who run just screaming at you like a lunatic, but they don't have any armor, so you can put them down in one slash. Right? The Indians out there run at you whooping and wailing, waving their hatchets, but they don't have any guns, so you can just blast them. Boom, 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 boom. And I found that very, very interesting. I've sort of come to the conclusion that as this is a common trope across history, this might be another area where you can't trust these colonial narratives and so on. I talked about this previously with cannibalism, where I don't think the Jesuits are in a position where they can be trusted to make the judgment of whether or not those people are cannibals, because they got material incentives to paint those people in as negative a light as possible. Similarly here, I don't think Julius Caesar can be trusted to say that the Gauls fought naked, covered in war paint or whatever the heck he said. I haven't read him. Julius Caesar is somebody who bragged to the Senate that he had killed 1 million Gauls and enslaved 1 million more. Julius Caesar is the sort of person who based his political career on committing genocide of these people.
Not only his career, but his very survival, given the cutthroat nature of Roman politics, rests on him justifying that genocide. He has direct and powerful material incentives to demonize these people. This is another angle of the Barbarian Warrior myth. It's an attack on the moral character of the people. They just don't care about life as much as we do. They don't care about life enough to wear armor. They're all about violence. This moral attack is also an attack on the humanity of the people. They aren't motivated by basic human instincts like self-preservation. They're not like you and me. They clearly don't care about going back home to see their wife and kids, so you shouldn't feel bad about cutting them down. I think this line of argumentation is entirely racist in nature. If this line of argumentation held, I think that the Christians would be the people most likely to reject armor on account of their afterlife beliefs. That the material reality of the most philosophically likely candidate stood in contrast to the argument tells me that the argument's probably invalid. Just some thoughts.